The ADDI Sentro debate, right? Should you get an ADDI or should you get a Sentro? If you want to know some very specifics and some tests that I did and what I think is the best machine, then keep watching. Both machines are good. A lot of people love all of them, and honestly, I think if you got either one, you'd be super happy because you just got to have one, right? They are so cool, so fun, but there are very specific differences between the two, and some people have their favorites, so don't get mad at me if I disagree with you, but I'm just going to tell you exactly what I went through to test both machines and what conclusion I came to at the end. The ADDI does not have a yarn tensioner for you to put through. The Sentro does. Now, I will say that myself and I know other knitters don't even use the yarn tensioner on the Sentro. The ADDI doesn't really need it because I find I get a lot better tension holding it. And also when you hold it, you can feel it if a knot comes up before it messes you up. You can feel it if it's starting to get a little tense on your skein and it's not flowing well. So for me to hold it lightly and provide my own tension works better anyway. Now there are times when you're kind of doing things with two hands and you want to be able to do something with this hand and turn with this hand, and that's the few times when it's kind of nice to be able to stick it in the tensioner. Because I tend to use a lot of slightly thicker yarns like the chenille, because I love working with the baby velour and the chenille, it's not an issue because it doesn't need any more tension than just the thread guide. So that's for tension. The next thing is that on the ADDI, you can get replacement needles if they break. Sentro, you cannot. Having said that, the Sentro is so much less expensive than the ADDI that you probably could just, if you bought a needle, first of all, I don't know anybody who's broken a needle. Put in the comments if you've ever broken a needle or if you know somebody that's broken a needle. But let's say you broke a needle. You could buy another whole Sentro machine, use the one needle out of it, and you could sell all the other needles on eBay because there's other people, I guarantee, that would like a replacement needle. So just throwing that out there, but I don't really think you're gonna break needles that often. Table clamps. Now this is something that a lot of people think is a big, huge deal. And absolutely, if your machine is not secure, it's a pain in the neck. If you have to hold it with one hand while you crank, you can't do anything else. You can't click a counter, you can't, there's just, it's a pain. You really do want it securely clamped to the table. So ADDI has clamps come with it. Sentro has suction cups. Now, if you have a very slick surface, like on my countertop that is a very slick granite, those suction cups suck really well. They stick down well, sometimes hard for me to get it off. But I don't really like to go stand in the kitchen to knit. And if you put it on any kind of a wooden table or anything that has any kind of texture, those suction cups are not going to do it. But it's absolutely no big deal. You can just go to Harbor Freight like I did, get some of those C-clamps. I did a whole video on it about how to clamp your different machines down to the table. Super easy to clamp it down. So really, that's a non-issue to me. Next is the handles. The ADDI handle's kind of weird. It's like this big disc. I'll put a picture of it here. It's like a big fat, and you kind of got to hold it like this while you're cranking. It's really awkward. I like the Sentro handle better. It's a nice round knob. You can really get going fast on it. I just feel like it's more ergonomic and it's a nicer knob. How about the looks of them? The ADDI is black and red. It looks like an adult, thing, whereas the little pink and white Sentro does kind of look like a toy. But if you like pink, then there's that. And honestly, I like the way they both look, but the Sentro does look a little bit more like a toy. The sound of them. This is another thing. The ADDI tends to be very loud. And I'm not sure if it's because it has like metal parts inside or not. I don't know what it has inside, but it is very loud. And the Sentro is super quiet. The biggest difference between the ADDI and the Sentro is the cost. The ADDI is way, way more expensive. The ADDI is $280 American, and the Sentro is $80. There's also the new ADDI with the analog counter, which I'll talk about later, that was even more. The one that I bought was with the new analog counter, and it also came with 3 books, which were actually really nice books. A little bit of cheap yarn, a cheap hook and needle that I threw away because I hate those plastic things. And it was $360. I paid $80 for my Sentro and no books or anything, but it did have, you know, the little plastic needles and a little bit of cheap yarn to get you started. So that's the price. How it works. Isn't that what really matters, right? I'm gonna go into more detail about how it works after this because I am going to go through and use all different weights of yarn and show you exactly what happens and how each machine handles different kinds of yarns. So, and if you want a complete spreadsheet of what I did and what I found about each kind of yarn and which, you know, worked better in the machines, see the description below. I'll put that in there for you. Okay, but overall, how I think they work, I think they both work amazing. I use them both. So I use them both. They both work great. The ADDI is solid and the Sentro is solid. They both work great. Now I am talking about the 46, 48 needle versions, not the 22 needle ones, because I found a huge difference between the Sentro 22 needle and the ADDI Express 22 needle. The ADDI is far superior on that one for some reason. Now I've heard that machines vary. I don't know if that's true, so I'm telling you what my experience is with my machines. The other thing is the ADDI has 46 needles, the Sentro has 48. I think that it's not a huge difference. Like anything you can make on one, you can make on the other. But those extra 2 needles are pretty handy. Actually, you can make a little bit bigger panel. The other thing is it's divisible by 4, which can really make a difference sometimes. If you say have a panel and you want something, you know, a purposeful drop stitch or, you know, whatever that you're doing at certain intervals, 48 is nicely divisible by 4 so that in your tube you can have 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's something. The 46 obviously is divisible by 2, but it's not divisible by 4. So you might have to fudge a little bit on something. Is that a huge deal? No. I think rarely you would ever even come up against that, but there it is. Okay, counters. The older ADDIs have a digital counter that does not work well. Apparently, I didn't have one, but what I've heard from others is that if the air is humid or different things can make it not work, or a lot of people said theirs just plain stopped working. So I believe the analog counter is better, and the new ADDIs come with an analog counter. That's what I have. Mine works great. The Sentro counter is exactly the same, works just as great. Now, I've had other people, there's one other YouTuber I think that said, Jojo Juju, I love Jojo Juju. She said that her counter broke, I think, on her Sentro and doesn't work anymore. Who knows? Mine's still working great. Both of those work equally well. If you're gonna get an ADDI though, do not get one with the digital counter. Okay, another difference is that the ADDI has 3 black needles, and then the other ones are your normal needles, like where you want to start and stop. And the Sentro only has 1. It has 1 white needle among pink ones on the big machine. I think on the little machine it's reversed, but I think those 3 black needles are really handy. You can see them coming easier. So on my Sentro, I just use a permanent marker to mark the, you know, right before the first needle comes back around, because when you're going pretty fast, you can blow past it. So I do like those 3 black needles as opposed to just the 1. Big deal? No, not at all. Okay, another difference is the yarn feeders are different. With the ADDI, the yarn feeder opens up and you put the yarn in and then it closes. On the Sentro, you just put it through. The yarn feeder on the ADDI looks like this. The yarn feeder on the Sentro looks like this. So the ADDI one opens, and maybe it's a little bit better for thicker yarns. I don't know, I haven't had any trouble with the Sentro one on any yarns, and I use thicker yarns quite a bit. And the ADDI thing opening is a little bit of a pain because you have to open it, put it in, close it, open it, put it in, close it. And if you leave it open, it goes clack, 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 clack on your needle. So to me, it's not really a plus, but it's not horrible either. Another difference is just the construction of them. The ADDI does seem a little bit heftier, maybe. Don't know if it actually has more metal inside of it or not. The legs seem a little bit heftier, not a huge amount, and the legs on the Sentro are just fine. They're definitely not like cheap and thin or anything. It's nice quality plastic, but the ADDI plastic might be a little bit harder, or I don't know, maybe it just looks better because it's black and shiny. I don't know, but it seems like maybe ADDI is a teeny bit, you know, heftier, but I'm not sure if that's just my subjective view or if it's, you know, something to be said. Sometimes I do feel like on the ADDI that they have smoothed the needles a little bit better, because when I first got my Sentro, I felt like the yarn was sticking up more and it just wasn't like sliding off of the plastic as well as the ADDI did right out of the box. But now that I've used my Sentro for a while, I don't feel like it's a problem. So maybe it kind of rubbed off the little teeny seams or something, I don't know. So, but again, not a big deal. Use my Sentro all the time, use my ADDI all the time. They both work great. Okay, here's a note. ADDI 22 is way, 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 way better than the Sentro 22. I actually would not recommend getting a Sentro 22. Just get the ADDI. It is worth more to get the small ADDI. So I have a small Sentro 22, and it's just, it doesn't even have suction cups. It's got practically nothing on the bottom, so you absolutely have to clamp it. Biggest thing for me is there's no counter. And I don't know about you, but with my middle-aged brain, a counter is a necessity because I've just messed up too many times. Even using a click counter. No, I need a counter on my machine. So that's a huge thing. Plus, it's just not as durable. I made some fur projects with it and some chenille projects with it, and the gears started slipping, and now it's to the point where I just have to throw it away because the gears are just so stripped from just not being able to handle the thick yarns. So I don't know, maybe if you only ever use thin yarns on it, maybe it would be fine. But even now I can't even use thin yarns on it because it's just, they're stripped. And I used a really lot of thick yarns on my little ADDI, and a lot. I used the heck out of it, and it didn't have any troubles. Originally, when I started doing this video, I thought I was going to show you me testing each yarn, and what I came to find out is that I spent hours and hours testing each different yarn. But basically what I did was I took yarns from each different thickness and a couple of different types, like some fur, some chenille, acrylic, you know, other different kinds, and I tested them, and I actually did a test strip, and I saw how it did, how the machines, different machines handled the exact same yarn. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to type it up into a spreadsheet, and I will put the PDF linked in the comments below so that you can look and see exactly which yarns worked well in which machines. I will say overall the ADDI does take the thicker yarns better. The big Sentro can handle some of the thicker yarns. Some of them you just have to be really finicky and you have to go really slow, and oh, there it dropped one fix, you know, that kind of thing. So it's not as nice. Whereas on the ADDI, I felt like it was just like no trouble. Though there were some, obviously neither machine can do the super big, huge, fat stuff. So that's that. But overall, if you're using 3 or 4 weight, yeah, I guess they call it Aran weight in not United States, but here we call it worsted. But if you're using that or a sport weight, which is that little bit thinner, you're not going to have any trouble with either of the machines. It's when you start getting into fur and thicker things that the ADDI will probably handle it better. So that's pretty much the outcome I got from the tests. Like I said, check out the PDF because there are some yarns that just plain don't work, and some that worked in the ADDI and not at all in the Sentro, and some that worked in both, but the Sentro was a little finickier. So that's kind of thing. So I've got that for you, but I'm not going to show you me texting all of those because it would take forever. The moment you have been waiting for, the conclusion. Which machine do I think is better? Well, let me start by saying, if you cannot afford the ADDI right now, don't wait. Get a Sentro. You will love it. You'll have fun with it. It works great. You will be happy with it, especially if you've never had an ADDI. You'll never know the difference. You will love it. You'll have fun. If you could maybe just save for a couple months and get the ADDI, I would probably recommend that. But if you're like, well, I can't afford an ADDI, so I'm not going to get anything. No, don't do that. Sentro works well. You will be happy with it. So I guess what I'm trying to say is there's not a total yes or no. I'd say if you can afford the ADDI, just get the ADDI. It seems more durable, seems like it's gonna last longer. It takes some thicker yarns a little bit better. Yes, it's a little bit louder, but to me, that's a good price to pay for what, is probably got more metal parts in it. Maybe that's why it's louder. I'm not sure why, but that's what I would recommend. But I think they're both great. I use both of them regularly and they work great on the 46-48. On the small ones, do not waste your money on a Sentro 22 needle. Just my experience, get an ADDI. And you know what machine I use more than either, if you're talking about between the 22 needle and the 46-48, I use a 22 all the time. And that's because I like to make dolls and toys, and even blankets make nice with the thin strips, but I do use both. There's definitely times when I use the bigger machine for hats and all kinds of things. So I definitely use both. If you're going to do flat panels, you just have to have the bigger machine, right? So that's my recommendation. I agree for the most part with people when they say ADDI is better, get an ADDI, but not really. Like, if you can't afford it, don't worry about it. The Sentro's great. You'll have fun with both machines. But I think if you could afford the ADDI, I would go with the ADDI. So I hope that was helpful, my knitting and crocheting friends. I hope you have a wonderful time. I hope you do get a machine if you don't have one yet. And much love always. Bye.